Arcturus's wrinkled face shined brightly from within. Maybe we've been looking for the greatest secret in the universe, whilst our brains have been using it from the day we were born. He muttered to himself in a moment like deep meditation. He took Shawna's eye and she met his, excitement firing between them both. You call it instincts, like feng shui, the butterfly effect, or the ether. And all Tatidals know there's an inexplicable way we can sense Alpha's effect on the world, but we've never done more than merely stroke our chins and very gently puzzle over why our minds sense anything. It isn't psychological. It's real. Our brains have copied the way the universe works, he chuckled. That's why you can sit down to do nothing when you're bored, and time can somehow get away from you. When you're fired up and scared, our thoughts can be stratospherically fast, 1,000,000 billion moments happening in just 1 second, which slows everything down. It's like your superpower, but it's real, it's physical, and our brains are actually controlling our universe. Chapter 1. Staying Forever. Excitedly leaving school in a high wave of late summer's heat, Shawna saw that figure again by the gate under the trees, and held off her immediate rage instead, feeling guilt swell within her, knowing something he didn't. This was the last time she was ever going home. Scylla and Chester, having left their higher English class with Mrs. Lancaster early, would already be halfway home together. Shawna, getting the same early darts on Fridays a year ago, would have been with them. Not this year. She had been dying to share with them her plans, but the moment slipped away at lunch. Now she wouldn't be able to say goodbye, or ask them once more for good luck. Can I play out tonight? Shawna choked, trying to act normal as her father walked straight past her, wafting the stain of a nauseating lacquer from his dirty green overalls straight up her nostrils. Nope, he replied, jovially, heading back toward the school. You, Trouble, are staying put again tonight. Come on. He gestured with a nod to return to the school. Confused, Shawna stood still for a moment. I need to get home. What for? He asked, his lips curling unbearably, and Shawna felt her resolve to pity him condensed back into fury. Sorry, Queen, the school has rung. Miss Carroll wants a word. He always called her Queen when trying to keep a tone of condescension out of his voice. Shawna moped back towards the school. Her head was so low her brown hair cascaded forward, hiding her big eyes and her sullen face. She was lost in thought of how much she was already missing Scylla and Chester this year. Without being able to talk to them, she was starting to suspect they didn't miss her as fondly. She was already feeling self-conscious about having to chase her best friends around. Where were they? She was meant to be their best friend as well. This year was hard enough without the doors all but blocked into their lessons together. That's why she needed greater independence. If she gave up everything, she would no longer have these problems. The embarrassment of stepping back into reception with her father grinning like a moron while the other pupils walked past, all trying to look over at them with craning necks, was too agonizing for words. Worse still, when Miss Carroll met them, her father's grin turned into an excited smile as he greeted her enthusiastically and apologized for his appearance. Shawna took a deep breath, tried to hold back her despair and not think about the vivid plays in her head, each trying to imagine what she would have to apologize for this time. Miss Carroll took them back to the classroom where Shawna had been for second period physics earlier that day and offered them 2 purple chairs opposite her. I have a reservation myself, so I don't want to keep you too long, Mr. Sefton, Miss Carroll said, shuffling loose papers into a neat stack at the side of her desk. They sat down on the hard plastic, and Shawna sensed Miss Carroll was looking resolutely anywhere but in her direction. I thought we needed to talk sooner rather than later. Please, call me Stephen, her father held up a modest hand. So I'll get straight to the point, she continued efficiently. I think Shawna would be better suited to level 3 or 4 physics classes with Mr. Gray and the foundation level end-of-year exams. What? Shawna answered before her father could muster a thought. You said year 9 mock exams don't count. What are you doing? Shawna, he snapped, and turned back to Miss Carroll. They've only just started the year, he asked gently. Haven't they? Miss Carroll, you promised me, Shawna explained. Shawna, I made no such promise, Miss Carroll said, doing well to keep her composure. I believe the promise was yours to try and stay on topic, on target, and be less disruptive. I never said that, Shawna retorted. Is she misbehaving? He asked. She's, Miss Carroll thought over her words carefully, demanding. At this, he turned to Shawna sharply. This happens time and again with you, Shawna. You think you ought to be in the top classes. You think you know best because you're challenging the teachers. Then, satisfied he'd done what was expected of him, he turned and addressed Miss Carroll again, like Shawna wasn't there. She's just trying to prove she's smarter than everyone. We had numerous incidents last year. I know, Miss Carroll said flatly. I was one of those incidents. It was during my class that Miss Sefton broke into the staff room. I think she just wants to stay with her friends, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. But you'll see them at break, and I think you'll like Mr. Gray. He's a brilliant teacher. His classes are fun and slightly unconventional, like yourself. But crucially, you won't have learned any less come the year end. You'll only be with a better teacher for you. Rubbish, Shawna exclaimed. Mr. Sefton, Miss Carroll spoke up with a tense expression. Today, Shawna severely cut short our learning by interrupting our practical use of Newtonian gravity. Because, Shawna burst out. No, 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 Miss Carroll leapt forward. Don't start, she said with a finger pointed right at the ridge of Shawna's nose. But, before she could say any more, no, Shawna barked back at her. That wasn't me. Haley turned to me and said she thought Einstein corrected Newtonian gravity, which he did. And who was the one who told her that? And who then took over the class? Miss Carroll smiled. Well, it wasn't you. When you were little, did you really say, when I grow up, I want to teach others things I know to be wrong? We're not learning anything except how to pass exams, which feels like cheating to me and the others too. She began counting them off on her fingers. Scylla, Chester, and Haley, everyone. Newton famously got the Americans to the moon, her father pointed out cordially. I'm sorry about this. He apologized as though a puppy would just weed on Miss Carroll's leg. She's a why child. Why are we collecting copper coins? Why do we have to eat onions? Why do we have to put toilet paper that way around? He chuckled to himself, whilst both Miss Carroll and Shawna's top lip were hooked upwards by mild disgust. Miss Carroll strained the folds between her dark eyebrows as Shawna went on. Dad, you always joke, Shawna pointed accusingly and put on her deepest impression. I've never had to use any poems from school or Pythagoras algebra. Her father turned red-faced and shrugged to Miss Carroll. And now you're telling me that because I don't want to learn the useless, nay, wrong theories, you're punishing me. I can't believe this is happening to me again. Shawna, her father spoke up, this is not a punishment. They are trying to help you. Miss, you know how hard I've tried to show you that I'm taking your lessons seriously, above any other teachers. Miss, Shawna pleaded. Teachers aren't just babysitting you, Shawna. This was something Shawna frequently accused the school of doing whenever she found herself sat in a meeting with a parent and teacher. And we are not discussing your emancipation day in, day out, Miss Carroll said with a little abandon that drew a raised eyebrow from her father. What's emancipation mean? Shawna asked sharply, and her father looked back to Miss Carroll politely, waiting for her to answer. It means legally freeing a minor from a guardian before they come of age, Miss Carroll burst out, then went on. See, you don't know it all. We do. We know more, and we've decided to teach you the useful, the most important, the good stuff, all right? We'll get to Einstein, but today was Newton. Why don't you try writing to the government? Her father chuckled, winking at Miss Carroll. Dad, you got mad at work because they asked you to take on another part of the job, and you'd quit if they dropped your wage. How come it's a joke when it happens to me? She said with a tear threatening to jump out at him. He didn't answer. Shawna, what do you want to do when you're older? What on earth do you think warrants such disregard for this school? Miss Carroll said, checking her chest for a beating heart. You, Shawna pointed accusingly, didn't know a thing about the difference between relativity and quantum physics, but I trusted you nonetheless, because I wanted to learn in your class, because I think it's beneficial, but you don't understand it. I could do something that hasn't been done, but you won't let me. That's very admirable, but really the majority of students don't. Adults really are like slavers in the deep south. Shawna lost her rag. Shawna, don't you dare finish that thought. How? Her father tried to interrupt. You are. You don't know everything, Shawna went on without regret. Telling us we'd better live and breathe a Christian life or else, like we've been so evil, we can't possibly do enough to be acceptable. Nothing's changed since the workhouses. We still have to grow up so we can live in your world. You don't help us. You still punish us for things you'd all get away with, just because you're adults. Would you be free if someone else held all your rights for 18 years? If you were told your religion, your team, and what was acceptable to learn? You don't know everything because you weren't taught everything. You need to grow up and recognize I'm capable of being my own adult. I should have freedom to get a mortgage, get a job, or choose my own lessons. I want rights. I want to write to the government and the Supreme Court. You're welcome to go to work every day and pay the mortgage, missy. You see, this is the problem, Miss Carroll finally managed to cut in by waving her hands wildly. You won't trust a word we say, and you've taken us way off topic, wasted 10 minutes because you haven't learnt your history. You want to be a bit more careful, Miss Sefton, she said, checking her watch angrily. Her father now looked like he was trying to swallow a tangerine whole. For what I want, Shawna went on regardless of their moaning, there's no class and no exam I can sit. I want something new. I need GCSEs for all the careers you lot have planned for me. This is bullshit, she stood up, slamming her palms on the desk. Shawna, sit down, her father demanded, and she did so without thinking. I've had enough. You've gone way too far. You'll do exactly as Miss Carroll says because she knows a damn sight more than you. And if you don't start treating us all with a little bit of respect, I said you don't know everything, Shawna cried. That's the same respect you give me. But he stood up over her, the grip of his fist pulling on the shoulder of her blazer. You'll be so sorry you won't even dare open your mouth or leave your damn room again, he finished with a warning scare. You don't seem to accept the fact that you don't know everything either. Miss Carroll tried to hide her shock by simply looking sternly at Shawna. She took a long breath and then said, I'm truly sorry for what's happened, Shawna. I know you're trying your hardest. You've got a very special gift of insight. If you can control it, you may end up being the most successful of all your classmates. One day telling others the story of how there's no shame in accepting this bit of help I'm offering. She smiled softly. There was nothing soft about the lines around Shawna's face, however. They were so sharp she could have taken a bottle top off with them. I don't know why I'm listening to this, she thought to herself, shaking her head, holding her lips tightly together. In her head she tried to repeat, I'm leaving and I won't be coming back, over and over again to quell the fury. But it wasn't working. They had kicked her while she was down for the last time. She'd exhausted every avenue with them, and still they'd pushed her, then told her to sit down, be seen and not heard. This was it. There was a moment's lull, then, You're not offering anything. You're forcing it. You don't listen to a goddamn word I'm saying, Shawna bit back hard. I'm asking for your help, your adult help, to learn better stuff than your out-of-touch garbage, and, forgive me, if Mr. Gray were such a good teacher, he'd already be teaching me, and you'd be doing the lower classes, so don't you dare offer me an explanation so full of bullshit. The meeting ended there, however, because Miss Carroll's desk had spontaneously broken apart, the two side cabinets falling inwards, then the top collapsing onto the teacher's knees. Shawna breathlessly tried to leave quickly, but her father wouldn't budge until he'd failed several times to fix it for her. When Miss Carroll found a letter from the headmaster in the wreckage of her desk that she claimed hadn't been there before, she read just one word before accusing Shawna of having put it there during the commotion. She placed it back in the envelope like it was a message from the front line and asked them to leave, hot-blooded, confused, and with all chances of reconciliation seemingly dashed. The long walk home in silence had calmed Shawna down, but her father pulsated with so much anger she thought he might throw her through the front door when it opened. Their house was on the corner of the street in the middle of a dense but green neighbourhood. She stiffly stepped inside the dark hallway, kicked off her shoes at the bottom of the stairs, then turned to see her father waiting at the dining room door, holding out her hands silently. She'd never seen his anger take this long to subside, but it was still hard to take him seriously with his cheap glasses perched upon his funny pink face that wouldn't look out of place on a North Pole elf. There was only one regard in which they were similar. He, too, was perpetually distracted, but otherwise they were nothing alike. Shawna was, without doubt, like her mother. They both had lots of lush brown hair, huge eyes, and the ability to know what her father and Shawna's older brother Mark were thinking, even if they didn't know it themselves. She had learnt to put up with her parents, but she could no longer stand herself here. She gave him her keys, and he closed his fist tellingly around them. Then he continued waiting, letting Shawna know that she was not welcome downstairs for a while. He finally locked the front door after she went up to her room, carrying her single front door key secretly in the palm of her hand. He'd taken her keys off her because tonight was not going to be her first attempt at running away. During one of Shawna's most successful escapes, she had managed to build and provide for herself in a home of her own with others for a whole month. She'd even made a living with lots of other homeless people, only one of whom was a dangerously unnerving drug dealer type. Otherwise, she had found independence, food, comfort, friendship, loyalty, and hospitality all in a month, and all because of her first meeting where she'd offered to pay fellow runaway Kenny her pocket money to steal food, thrown away by supermarkets, and bring it back for them both to share. This time, however, she had an even better plan for her life, and not her parents nor even the police were going to be a physical match for her. She'd get past them all, no holds barred. At around 6 in the evening, it was just starting to get dimmer outside. Shawna gently pulled the flaking yellow door handle and snuck out onto the landing and down the stairs. The dark maroon, gold and green wallpaper on the landing made her feel willfully mundane in the same way vomit did. Everything in this house was made to be particularly ugly or uninspiring. It had all been carefully weighed, judged, and purchased to fit into such painstaking normality that every moment in its oppressive nullity sucked all the belief out of Shawna. So Shawna sat herself at the bottom of the stairs, unmotivated to move by the decor, and waiting impatiently for Mark to get home and hopefully strike some kind of distracting energy into the house. She listened through 2 walls to the only thing her father ever seemed happy to watch, the Northwest News. But this evening she would have to have her eardrums battered by her father snoring on the couch instead. As she sat on the stairs waiting for her opportunity, Shawna felt an odd pull from behind and turned to look up the top of the stairs. It had been nearly 5 years since it had last occurred, at the end of the road. She'd been to a sleepover in Andy Bulger's house playing house with Chester Siller and 2 others she didn't know very well. Andy had wanted all her friends to put on a show for her family. This was too much for Andy to realistically manage, Shawna had surmised, and since it was not even a real show, when they all went outside to get a tent, Shawna had simply run for the front door. Shawna had been walking lonely beside the hedge park when she'd felt a pull at her front, like a sudden rush of air pushing her chest out. She looked up to see, at the furthest end of the road, and yet clear as if sat beside her at their small dinner table, a ghostly white lattice patchwork of lines hovering above the road like a cloud, wide but slender at both ends and not quite rectangular or circular, like a UFO made of a lace doily. "Mum?" Shawna inquired of the ghost at the top of the stairs. It was one of Shawna's intuitions that surprised even herself. She always knew this was somehow her mum, giving her a light tug so Shawna would look her way and she'd be able to see Shawna's face. While Shawna stared blankly at her motherly ghost, her actual real-life in-the-flesh birth mother turned the keys and walked into the hall. Her mum gave Shawna every ounce of lukewarm feeling she could muster, which amounted to the slightest of glances and a smile that yet already looked disappointed with her. Shawna had once tried to speak to her mother and father about the ghosts they couldn't see. They had joked about moving to a less haunted street, then roundly ignored Shawna's questions and moved on to smaller matters like whether they should dip into the savings for the car and trivialities about having to find new jobs. Shawna knew they hated her for not being like them. They had no clue how important the motherly ghost might be, and it was for this reason that Shawna was going to be unstoppable in her escape to the coast, and perhaps beyond. Shawna noticed her mother had to take her father's key out of the door from the outside and yet also had her own keys in her other hand. He'd left his key outside in the door. Shawna wouldn't have been able to get through even if she'd tried, and yet she hadn't bothered to. My weird intuition, she concluded to herself, but then she thought, how had he locked the door from the inside? Shawna rolled her eyes at her father's unfathomable madness, but at the back of her mind wondered if it might be some method of stopping her escaping. "Steve!" Shawna's mother cried out. There was a half-hearted acknowledgement in reply from her awoken father. "Shawna, where's your keys?" This was bad news. Shawna knew anything which got past her father would not get past her mother. "Hey, son, good day," her dad said. They didn't kiss, but together they were embraced in concerned anticipation. Sandy's softened, pursed face might have been drawn and beaten down by the bright light she used to make wedding dresses, but her father still followed her around like an obedient puppy as she checked Shawna's keys hidden on top of the cupboards. Both were not quite looking over at her. Before Sandy discovered her dad had the wrong key, Shawna turned and went back upstairs. Throughout all of Shawna's strong misery, her mother had been the greatest letdown, by virtue of the great hope and expectation Shawna felt from her. A year or so earlier, she'd been trying to make an effort with Shawna. It was obvious. One day, Shawna had purposely missed her school bus, but her mum had decided to call in sick on her behalf, and then called in sick herself with a wonderfully lively phone call to her boss about Shawna breaking her ankle, and there'd be tears and swearing, hospital trips, and pulling her hair out. Shawna was impressed, but More impressive was the day it led to. They had gone shopping, bought chocolates, and Shawna had picked out what they would have for tea that night, all while Mark was in school, completely unawares. Shawna didn't mind the blatant effort, however forced. When they were doing so many new things together, the only drawback was her mum constantly asking if she liked it or not. One afternoon, her mum was trying to fit 2 activities into one Saturday. After junior tennis, they were going to go to a grotto of home furniture where Shawna was going to be able to pick out her own bedside lamp. After that day, though, her mum reverted and told Shawna to stop pretty much anything she ever caught Shawna doing, as well as holding Shawna accountable for always being in the way. In short, she had given up on being Shawna's mother after that day, which Shawna lamented. Shawna sat and thought about what happened most nights. Her pencil would often lift inexplicably off the pad every time she was thinking about nothing. She wondered what it was she did that would have made her mother give up so entirely. Shawna had been excited to choose something for herself, but it ended with them both vowing never to speak again because of the scene they'd made. From the moment when Shawna's mum had picked up the lamp opposite the lava lamp Shawna found, Shawna had loudly made her case from 10 feet behind her mother all the way through to the till. Once they were in the car journey home, however, Shawna had quickly forgotten about it and had turned her attention to wondering how to make a lava lamp instead. Her mum discovered Shawna shortly after rushing around the house, grabbing items and conspicuously tidying up after herself. Her mum had finally stopped her, grabbed her arm and almost lifted her off the floor when she caught Shawna sneaking vegetable oil upstairs. Then, in Shawna's bedroom, her mother had thrown Shawna onto the bed in rage frustration when she discovered Shawna had dismantled the new lamp, placed the bulb and wire underneath an upside-down pint glass, and was about to mount a tennis ball tube filled with oil on top. The bottle of oil swiped back and forth in her mother's hand and was pointed at Shawna several times. "Steve, get in here!" Sandy yelled, pacing wildly, almost afraid to look at Shawna for fear of what she might say, afraid it might get worse. Her father moaned getting off the couch and groaned getting up the stairs, and when he entered, he casually took a bite off his chocolate bar. "Your daughter thinks it's a good idea to put a tube of oil," her mum picked up Shawna's tennis ball tube and threw it directly at Shawna, then carried on top of that pint glass and the bulb, which, by the way," she went into mocking newsreader tones, "used to be the lamp we bought her only last weekend. Now look at it." "Let me show you," Shawna whimpered, cowering as she took the tube over to the pint glass with some gaffer tape. "She's not even listening to us," her mum burst out. "We've been over this. We can't blame her if she can't concentrate. We need to be patient," Stephen muttered, giving her a knowing look, but Shawna's face flushed. She hated him bringing that up. "Maybe we should go easy on her," he said to Sandy, and immediately regretted it from the look she gave him. Shawna could see him deciding to agree with Sandy. He took a second to grow in anger, then, "Shawna, that was an expensive lamp." "I don't understand what her problem is. I'm making a lava lamp for less money," Shawna argued and stood up, but her father stepped forward and pushed her back on the bed as he took apart the glass and bulb setup. "Don't talk to your mother that way," he said sternly. "You're breaking it," Shawna begged as he peeled away tape she'd used to set it down. "This is not a lava lamp. Were you going to put oil in this?" he continued harshly, holding the tennis ball tube. Shawna's heart raced and tears began to fall. She just wanted everyone to calm down. She wanted to run away until they were ready to hear her explain. She had known they would never have let her do it. That's why she never said anything. But if they saw it working, she'd be able to explain. "It goes in with water," Shawna started. She always hated having to explain everything she ever did. "And food colouring and Alka-Seltzer!" Her father discovered 3 packets beside the cabinet and her mother snatched them off him. "Are these from my medicine box?" "How come she's allowed to talk to me that way?" Shawna picked on her father. "Because she's the grown-up," he barked at her scarily, grabbing her arm tightly. He had a bigger temper than Mum's, but she'd only ever seen it once or twice. "Everything you're doing here, Shawna, is bleeding dangerous. You could set the house on fire." "You don't know," she began to cry. "You don't understand," he yelled back. "We do know we're your bloody parents now. You're going to pay for that lamp." "How? I don't make any money." "I never meant with money," he said with a bite. "Look at that lamp now. It's sodding ridiculous," her mother chimed back in, holding up the crudely broken stalk. "Good luck drawing or reading your books." Then she became really heartless. "And if you think we're making or buying or so much as even allowing you to look at a lava lamp, you've got another thing coming in that stupid, silly little head of yours." "All right, Sandy, all right." Shawna's father took Sandy away to the back of the room by the shoulder. Shawna's mum made an imitation of clawing her fingernails across her face, showing the same anguish as if she were really flaying her own skin. "You can't keep doing this, Shawna," her mother cried into Stephen's chest. "It's impossible. You take no responsibility. You're—" Shawna knew the word on her lips was stupid, but she wasn't angry enough to say it again. There was a moment's silence. Shawna took a deep breath and sucked in her quivering bottom lip. "You can't keep taking everything away from me. I don't have anything of my own, and all you want is to tell me what to do." "For heaven's sake, Shawna, I don't understand you," Steve interrupted snarkily. "You bang on about wanting to be an adult so bad, but you don't want us to tell you how to behave." "No, because I'd be a much better adult without you. You take my responsibility away and hold me back." She looked back at what remained of her lamp. "It doesn't matter if I copy yours. I'll still just be a pet you're training to live in the house. If I have to do everything your way before you'll let me be, I'd rather be someone else. You're pathetic," Shawna snarled. Then the doorbell rang, and Shawna shot up alarmed to answer the door, but she found herself caught by her dad's arm. "Who's at the door?" her father asked, fully expecting the answer to be as bad as he could imagine. Shawna felt panic like she'd never experienced before. She'd set everything up with such confidence, yet now she felt trapped and hopeless. I wanted to prove I wasn't irresponsible. I wanted to show off what our lava lamp would be worth." Her breath was stealing away her words, and her eyes seemed fit to explode as she went on. "So I invited an estate agent to value the house." She looked as sorry as she could. Both were struck utterly dumb as they stared at her for a moment. "You what?" her mother breathed, with tears now choking her throat. "If you just let me—" Shawna cried profusely as she tried to finish. "You've called an estate agent!" her father yelled as carefully as he could. "Well, you don't want to stay here forever anyway, do you?" Shawna asked innocently. "I'd like to have the option," he replied in wide-eyed fury. "I don't believe this," her mum said, wiping her face. "You'll be lucky if you don't end up in a bloody mental institution like Ashworth when you grow up." Then she suddenly and violently grabbed the door as the bell rang a second time downstairs, and she went flying out. "If you don't appreciate the roof we put over your head, will you be dismantling that too?" he asked sarcastically, but then there was a fleeting but real look of fear on his face. Then they heard Mum's high-pitched yell from downstairs. "Are you taking orders from kids now?" Shawna told herself to stop thinking about that day, yet, after half an hour, she'd only managed to empty her school books into the corner of her bedroom. She could hear her dad on the phone and decided, if I can hear Dad, they can hear me. So she put the small telly on loud in her room. The sky was getting orange outside as she picked up her teddy, called Teddy, and it went into the bag. She grabbed a woolly jumper, some underwear, a bathing suit, and her well-hidden pocket money from her bedside drawer. She already had her pencil case and pad in her bag as always, but she swooped up a few more pencils and questionable felt-tip pens from the drawer, then put them into her bag too. Then she looked at her duvet. That's impossible, she thought. But the pillow and the blanket? What if they get wet? An umbrella too, then. She repacked her bag, and she sat cross-legged on the bed and resolved to carry her pillow and an itchy teal blanket under her arm. She thought for a moment if there was anything she was going to miss. Her desk was probably the best bit. It was where she was able to do all her drawings and work out what she was going to do. But not sat at her desk, no. Against the wall at the back of the desk was a scrunched-up pink and white tablecloth, pinned to both the desk and the wall. Her father had proved himself useful for once. When she traipsed in from Andy Bulger's house, he provided the pins and some of the idea to create this hide. She would pull the desk out, bouncing it across the carpet beneath the window, then the pink cloth would create a roof behind it. She'd climb underneath, and her mum had decorated the sheet with some old Christmas tree lights to create a warm dimness where she could sketch away from them without fear of being told off for anything. Shawna started to cry as she gently touched a toe to the greasy carpet. Crack! The floorboard booed in anguish. Shawna felt happier immediately, and did nothing more than roll her eyes. She put on her favourite shoes, psyched herself up again, and went to check the coast was clear. The only thing visible to her on the landing was a vertical ribbon of light opposite. Then Mark! He was in his room across the hall. He lay in an unusual position on his bed, twisting at an awkward angle just to lay down and view the television screen and play his Xbox. His feet were unwelcomingly protruding into the hall, his socks pinned to the door frame by his toes. "Hey, Baba," came a voice from the gloom. It was now or never. The blood in Shawna's ears started thumping before she'd even realised she'd made the decision to walk. She stepped out. Mark was simultaneously the weak spot and the danger for being caught, so Shawna headed as if she was going to the bathroom, with her backpack and pillow. She was lucky. Mark didn't stir, so now it was just her parents in the way. She tried to imitate the sound of Mark's telltale, heavy footfalls going down the stairs. Halfway down, though, Mark's TV was silenced, and his bed gurgled as he got up. Shawna kept moving. Now her arms were shaking. Mark went into the bathroom, and Shawna took out her key as she approached the front door. She thought about if she'd call back to say goodbye as she left. At least then they would know she wasn't doing it because she didn't care for them at all. The key wouldn't turn. She was locked in again. How? She thought. And is it my imagination, or is everything, even the air I'm breathing, making a really loud noise? She was certain her parents would be sat in the living room now, deciding to investigate all the noise she was making. Shawna couldn't risk being caught, bags packed and ready to leave. She'd never be given the chance again. She tried to catch her breath and listen, but couldn't hear anything over all the damn noise she seemed to be making. The longer she stayed there, the harder it became to even check if the coast was clear. It was easier to go back upstairs. Get out of your own way, she thought, and she leaned to look through the door, past the dining room, into the kitchen and the back door. The voice in her head that was usually angry, telling her what a failure she had been, was silent. If she decided to stay, she could be happy and healthy, but would she be herself for much longer? She could feel herself changing lately, and she didn't want to. Shawna suddenly realised she had no idea how long she'd been stood there, but Mark's telly was back on, and her parents hadn't moved. Shawna looked through to the back door again. She heard her father yawn beyond the door to the living room, and it made her jump. At first, Shawna turned back to run to their room, but she was strong and shaking. Summoning bravery out of nowhere, she dropped the bag and a pillow to her hips and held it on their far side as she walked out. The door to the living room was wide open as she walked past, and saw her father pointing her mum encouragingly towards the telly, while she was turned to the side, glasses on, a folder from work open in front of her knees, and a pencil between her fingers, whilst there was a smile on the periphery of her lip. "You okay, Shawna?" her mum said, looking up. Just then, and not before, Shawna suddenly realised her face was red, hot, and wet. "Yeah, just getting something to eat. Tea will be here soon." The folder flapped down, and the couch groaned. Quickly, in an effort to act normally, Shawna turned on the kitchen light and opened the fridge. The brightness seemed to chill her like an icy wind after a game of football. The fridge closed, and Shawna heard a weight lift off the couch with a growl. "Shawna, what's going on? You can tell me," came her mum's voice. Shawna lunged for the back door, shaking the handle. Locked! She turned to the countertop. Behind the fruit bowl, there was the key. She took it, and smoother than she'd ever been in her entire life, she pressed it into the door and turned until the handle gave way. She left the key in and rushed out into the evening. "Stay, quick!" she suddenly heard her mum call out. Shawna quickly threw herself at the garden side gate. Stupid, it was locked, of course. She almost punched the bolt as she felt her mother descending on her. The latch lifted and she kicked the door open, just as she saw Sandy advance seemingly 20 yards to outside in a single step. Then her father bounced wildly out behind her. Shawna dodged around the car into Cherry Tree Drive. Then she turned the bend onto Longmore Lane and sprinted. "Sandy, leave it!" she heard her father call. "Go get Mark!" Mark would catch her with ease. In fact, she wasn't sure her father wouldn't catch her. She'd never seen him run. She'd never seen him with more energy than it took to get off the couch. Even though Shawna was already halfway down the street, she still heard her mother cry, "Mark!" And no sooner had his name been called than Shawna felt Mark giving chase in the street, barefoot but fast. She wasn't going to make it. She had to lose sight of her father and her brother. So she held her breath and slammed her arms and legs backwards and forwards faster than they'd ever moved before. "Shawna!" ordered her father. The streets were endless. There was no field to run through, no bushes to hide in, only front gardens, low walls, and cars. Cars! In a few moments her mother would be chasing her in the car. There was nothing else for it. She ran across the road regardless of an oncoming bus full of people staring at them, and went into Triton Street. Seconds was all she had. A few seconds before her brother and maybe her father would round the corner and fix their eyes on the chase again. She needed to reach the next street, Stanleyfield, but it was too far away. They would see her. "Get inside the wheelie bins," she thought. She stopped at the first one and opened the lid, but she was too short to make it in without toppling it over. Sure enough, it fell on its side and a soggy piece of cardboard dislodged itself from the bottom as Shawna took off again, shaking. She'd wasted time. She would have to hide. She crossed the road, ducked behind the line of parked cars, and started creeping along, listening as the earth-shaking footsteps of her father and brother rounded the bend onto the street. Shawna kept moving. She backed down the street, looking out for any gap between the cars they might see her through. Their footsteps slowed dramatically as they passed the bin. Then Shawna heard her father's crossing the road and onto the pavement as she slipped between two cars and hid her face in her knees. "She's hiding," said Mark. "She won't have gotten to the end. She's here somewhere. Shawna, we know you're here. Keep an eye out, Dad." Shawna heard her brother flipping the lids of the other wheelie bins. "Check under the cars," her dad said, crossing the road again, and Shawna stepped out. She kept moving. The gap between two cars allowed her to see the side of her father's head. He was stampeding down the street. Shawna paused and hid behind a car tire as he dropped to the floor to look underneath the cars. Another bin lid flipped open. "Check under the cars," her dad shouted again as he passed in the middle of the street. "I am," yelled Mark. This was not good. Stephen had now passed her and Shawna was exposed, hiding with her brother or father in either direction. She was so close to Stanleyfield Street. She thought about doubling back to Longmore Lane. She watched the back of her father's head bob past her and he peered down Stanleyfield Street, checking every angle, then heading back. As he did, Shawna caught a glimpse of his face. He looked dishevelled, and he drew his arms up to grapple his head like a child cradles a bowling ball. Shawna ducked down. She quickly checked where Mark was and began moving behind the cars again. She paused to wait for the sound of his footsteps to pass, then moved once more. "Check behind those cars again," Mark insisted. Shawna panicked. She kept moving until she dared no longer, and she slid in between the front of two cars as once again her father appeared on the pavement where she'd been. 20 yards. That was all there was. Her father was walking the other way. Shawna didn't wait for him to turn. She backed down the street with nothing between her father and her but open air and a slight dusk. 15 yards. Her father flipped her bin open and looked across the street. All he had to do was turn and he'd be staring her in the face. "Anything?" he cried. 10 yards to go. Every step was worth 2 from her crouched position. She was tired, hot, feeling sick, and worst of all, she was starting to feel guilty. 5 yards. She heard a car turn onto the road. She began to turn and she ran for it, leaving her brother, father, and possibly her mother looking for her on Triton Street.